Hello, and welcome back to another chilling tale. We are Basement 13, your guides to the darkest corners of the unknown. We share stories sent to us by listeners just like you. Today, we have something truly terrifying. A tale sent to us by Josh, a man from the countryside. It's a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Josh, a forest ranger, sent us his experience, and trust me, this one will make you think twice the next time you hear a rustling in the woods. Now, before we dive into Josh's story, let me explain a little bit about the life of a forest ranger. Rangers work in forests and are responsible for the safety of the wildlife, managing forest fires, and ensuring that nature is protected. They live in isolated towers in the middle of the forest, far away from any town or city. These towers are often surrounded by miles of dense trees and thick woods. A ranger's job isn't easy. The isolation, the harsh weather, and the constant vigilance required can break even the strongest people. It's not a job for everyone. The forest is a dangerous place, and most people couldn't survive a single night out there without proper training and equipment. Now, let's move on to Josh's story. This one is particularly chilling, and it all begins with an assignment at Tower 411, located deep in the forest. When Josh took this job, he had no idea what kind of terror awaited him. Josh had always been drawn to the idea of working in the wilderness, surrounded by nothing but nature. He'd been a forest ranger for a few years, hopping from one remote post to the next, each one offering a new kind of challenge. But this assignment was different. It was late November when Josh got the call. He had just returned from a short trip to visit his family in the city and was looking forward to some time off. But then, the company offered him a month-long assignment at Tower 411. It was a lonely post, deep in the heart of the forest, miles away from any town. The pay was good, and they promised him extra time off afterward to recover. Josh hesitated. He had heard rumors about Tower 411. Some said the place was haunted. Others claimed it was cursed. But Josh didn't believe in those kinds of things. He had been a ranger long enough to know that people love telling stories, especially when they're alone in the woods. The pay was too good to pass up. He packed his gear, said goodbye to his girlfriend, and headed off for the assignment. The drive was long, winding through the countryside and then deep into the dense forest. The road got narrower and bumpier as he neared the tower, and Josh felt that familiar sense of isolation creeping in. There was no signal, no civilization, just trees. Endless trees. By the time he arrived, the sun had already set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The tower stood in the distance, silhouetted against the darkening sky. It looked old, much older than any of the other towers he had been to. The wood was weathered, and the metal beams surrounding it looked rusted, like the place hadn't been maintained in years. He parked his truck and grabbed his gear. As he approached the tower, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The silence in the forest was so complete, it was almost suffocating. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. A man appeared from the shadow of the tower, his face half hidden under the brim of his hat. He walked up to Josh slowly, almost like he knew Josh would be there. "Maxwell, I assume?" the man said, his voice low, gruff. "Welcome to Tower 411. I'll get you settled in." Josh nodded, trying to shake the unease creeping up his spine. The man turned and led him inside, and as Josh stepped through the door, the air inside felt colder, thicker, like the tower was holding its breath. Josh settled into his new home for the month, the small, dimly lit room at Tower 411. It was nothing like the other ranger stations he'd worked at. The room was cramped and sparsely furnished. A small cot, a desk with a single lamp, a window with a view of nothing but trees and darkness. There was no comfort here, only the cold and the quiet. As he unpacked his gear, Josh felt the weight of the silence pressing on him. It wasn't just the stillness of the forest outside. It was something deeper, something that seemed to seep into the tower itself. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, like the tower was holding its breath. He tried to shake off the feeling. He was a professional, after all. He had been to remote stations before. This was just another post, just another assignment. Still, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. The woods were too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. The ranger who had greeted him, a man named Tom, left him with only a few words of advice. Don't go out after dark, and keep the lights off between midnight and 4 a.m. If you follow the rules, you'll be fine. Josh wasn't sure what Tom meant by that. The rules? What kind of rules were those? But before he could ask more, Tom had disappeared back into the shadows of the trees. The night settled in quickly, and Josh sat by the window, watching the dark expanse of the forest. It was hard to tell where the trees ended and the sky began. A low, unsettling breeze whispered through the branches, but there was something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. A feeling, a presence. The darkness outside seemed to stretch on forever, and Josh couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching him. He tried to push the thought out of his mind and focused on the job ahead. He was here to do a job, nothing more. But when the clock struck midnight, he felt it. A sound, a soft whistle. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. The sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was coming from the woods. It was so faint, but Josh couldn't ignore it. Someone or something was out there. He turned off the light, trying to follow the rules, but his thoughts raced. Who else could be out there in the middle of the night, in this desolate place? The silence returned, but the unease lingered. The next night, Josh couldn't sleep. The sound of the whistle had haunted him all day, lingering in his mind like a dull ache. Every time he tried to push it away, it came back, clearer, louder, and more deliberate. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was out there. By midnight, he was wide awake, his nerves stretched tight. The forest outside was still, too still. There was no rustling of leaves, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, just silence, deep, suffocating silence. The whistle came again, but this time it was closer, sharper. The sound was so precise it made his stomach tighten. He got up from his cot and moved toward the window, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the noise. The beam from his flashlight cut through the dark, but there was nothing, just the trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. The wind wasn't blowing, but the branches swayed, casting strange shadows across the ground. Josh stood there, holding the flashlight, scanning the woods. He had no idea what he was looking for, but the more he searched, the more his heart raced. The whistle came again, just behind him, close enough now that he could hear it, as if someone was standing right outside the window. Without thinking, Josh turned around, flashlight in hand. There was nothing behind him, just the dark, empty room. He stood there for a moment, his pulse quickening. He wasn't sure if he was hearing things, or if there really was something. Someone out there. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The next day, Josh decided to ignore the feeling, telling himself it was just the isolation playing tricks on him. He had been on many isolated posts before. This wasn't anything new. But deep down, he couldn't shake the thought that something was wrong, something more than just his imagination. When the sun went down, he felt it again. The whisper of the whistle, followed by the same eerie silence. This time, it was different. This time, the sound was closer. And as he stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, he saw it, a figure standing just at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the shadows. Josh froze, unable to move. It was watching him, and the whistle came again, softer this time, like a warning. Josh stood there, staring at the shadow in the woods, his breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The figure didn't move. It was as if it was just standing there, watching him, waiting. Josh's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It wasn't like any animal he knew, and it certainly wasn't one of the other rangers. It was too still, too unnatural. His flashlight flickered in his hand, but he couldn't make himself look away from the shape. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, barely visible through the trees. But Josh could feel it. Its eyes. He could feel them boring into him from the darkness, pinning him in place. The whistle came again, soft and eerie, a note that hung in the air longer than it should have. The sound felt like it was pulling at him, making him want to walk into the woods, into the darkness. He shook his head. his mind screaming to leave, to lock the door, to do anything other than stand there. But his feet were rooted to the ground. It wasn't until he heard the footsteps that Josh snapped out of his trance. Heavy, deliberate, slow. They were coming closer, right toward him. Josh's breath hitched as he finally pulled his eyes away from the figure. He backed away from the window, his pulse thumping in his ears. His whole body was trembling now, a mix of fear and confusion. Was it real? What was out there? What did it want? The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer. It wasn't just one pair of footsteps, it was multiple. The noise seemed to surround him, coming from every direction. Then came the breathing, heavy, labored. It was as if something, or someone, was standing just outside, breathing in the cold night air. Josh tried to calm himself, but he couldn't. He moved quickly to the door, locking it with trembling hands. The room felt suffocating, and every small noise seemed amplified. He could still hear the footsteps, the breathing. It was getting closer, closer to the tower. Suddenly, the scratching sound started. It wasn't just a faint noise anymore. It was loud, deliberate, like claws scraping against the door, trying to find a way in. Josh stood there in the dark, eyes wide with panic, clutching his flashlight like it was a weapon. He could feel the pressure building in his chest as the sound grew louder. The thing outside was no longer just a figure. It was something alive, something that wanted in, something that wasn't going to stop. And then the scratching stopped. But the silence that followed was even worse. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and Josh knew he wasn't alone in that tower anymore. Josh's heart raced in the silence that followed the scratching. He held his breath, waiting, praying that whatever was outside would leave. But the quiet stretched on, thick and suffocating, and the tension in the air seemed to grow with every passing second. He didn't dare move. Every nerve in his body was on edge. He stood frozen by the door, his hands gripping the flashlight until his knuckles were white. The darkness outside pressed in, but the creature, the thing he couldn't even name, was still there. It was waiting. Josh wanted to call for help, to radio the other rangers, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. No one would hear him out here in the middle of the forest. Tower 411 was the only place for miles, and it was as isolated as it could get. His radio had no signal, and the only thing keeping him from total panic was the weak beam of light from his flashlight. The minutes seemed to stretch into hours as he listened to the stillness, his mind working in overdrive. Was it gone? Was the creature just waiting? He didn't know, but he had to find out. He moved quietly toward the window, his flashlight shaking in his hand as he peered out. At first, he couldn't see anything, just the blackness of the woods. But then, he saw it. A figure, barely visible, standing just at the edge of the trees. It was tall, too tall, and it seemed to blend into the shadows, making it impossible to make out its features. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but Josh could feel it staring at him. The whistle came again, soft but clear. This time, it was closer. Josh's breath caught in his throat. It knew he was watching. His pulse was pounding in his ears. He wanted to run. He wanted to lock the door and never look out again, but he couldn't. The figure didn't leave. It just stood there, and the whistle came again, louder this time. It was a low, eerie sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The feeling of being watched intensified, and Josh knew one thing. He wasn't alone. The silence returned, but this time, it felt more dangerous than before. The creature, whatever it was still out there, and it was closer than ever. Josh couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure in the distance. The whistle continued, echoing in the stillness of the night. It wasn't the sound of a person lost in the woods or a curious animal. It was deliberate, purposeful, like it was calling to him, pulling him into the darkness. Josh's mind raced. The figure hadn't moved, but the feeling of its presence, the feeling of being watched, was overwhelming. Every fiber of his being screamed to run, to leave, to escape whatever was lurking outside. But his feet were frozen in place. His instincts were screaming at him to stay still, to stay quiet. But the terror of being so exposed gnawed at him. He knew the tower was supposed to be his safe place, but it didn't feel safe anymore. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, and the whistle sounded again. Closer this time, almost like it was right outside. The air in the room grew thicker, as if the forest had wrapped its dark fingers around the tower itself. Josh's throat went dry, and his hand trembled as he clutched the flashlight. The sound was no longer just the whistle. It was mixed with something else, a scraping noise, like claws dragging against the ground. He dared to inch toward the window, his eyes never leaving the shadowy figure outside. The flashlight flickered, casting a dim light across the woods. Josh's gaze flicked toward the tree line, and that's when he saw it. Movement. Something was moving in the shadows. Not just one thing, but several, creeping forward like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Josh's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed at him to stay silent, but his body was trembling, and he couldn't control it anymore. The creatures, whatever they were getting closer. He could hear their footsteps now, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the dry leaves. A rush of panic filled Josh's chest. He wasn't safe. The tower, which had been his refuge just hours ago, now felt like a trap. In his mind, he ran through his options. Could he climb out the window and escape into the woods? The thought made him shiver. He could barely see in the dark, and if the creatures were out there, he'd be dead before he made it very far. He could try to radio for help, but the tower had no reception. He was alone, completely alone. The scraping sound came again, louder now, like claws dragging against metal. It was coming closer. Josh's heart pounded as he realized the creatures were circling the tower. The feeling of being surrounded was overwhelming. They weren't just outside, they were everywhere, closing in on him. The whistle had stopped, replaced by that same low, guttural growl that sent a chill straight down his spine. He pressed his back against the wall, the flashlight clutched in his hand like a lifeline. His breath was shallow, his eyes darting around the room. The shadows seemed to grow darker, to stretch toward him, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw movement at the corner of his vision. And then, the door rattled. Josh's blood ran cold, his breath hitched in his throat. It was here. The thing outside, the creature, was trying to get in. The rattling stopped, but only for a moment, before the door creaked open. The air turned ice cold, and Josh could see his breath in the dim light. The door rattled once more, louder this time, and Josh's blood ran cold. His hand was frozen around the flashlight, his whole body trembling. The thing outside wasn't just playing games anymore. It was trying to get inside. His mind raced. He tried to remember every piece of training he'd ever had, every piece of advice he'd received. Nothing could prepare him for this. He had heard stories about the dangers of the forest, rangers disappearing, strange occurrences. But he never imagined this. Not like this. This was real. The door creaked again, but now it was no longer just the wind. There was something there, something trying to force its way in. The air around Josh grew thick and suffocating, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread flood his chest. For the first time, Josh realized what had been bothering him all night. It wasn't just the sound of whistling, or the figure in the woods, or the growling. It was the feeling of something wrong, something that didn't belong here. And whatever it wasn't going to leave him alone. He backed away slowly from the door, pressing his back against the wall. The rattling stopped, but only for a moment. And then, a sound that made his skin crawl. The scraping. It was coming from the floor. Someone was dragging itself across the ground. The noise was low at first, then grew louder as it came closer, like claws scraping against wood. Josh's mind screamed at him to run, to escape, but he couldn't. His feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The scraping stopped just outside the door, and Josh felt the darkness pressing in. The tower, the room, everything felt smaller now. The shadows seemed to move, creeping across The creature lunged, its movements impossibly fast. Maxwell didn't have time to think, let alone react. The force of the attack sent him sprawling to the floor, the creature's cold, clammy hands grabbing at his arms, pulling him toward its mouth, where jagged teeth gleamed like knives in the dim light. Maxwell struggled, trying to free himself, but it was no use. The thing was too strong. Its grip tightened around his wrists, and he could feel its breath, cold, foul, and heavy on his face. He could hear the low growl from deep within its throat as it bared its teeth, ready to rip into him. His body screamed for him to fight back, but it felt like his limbs had turned to lead. His mind was screaming, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed, helpless in the creature's grasp. In a final, desperate move, Maxwell managed to summon enough strength to slam his flashlight into the creature's face. It was only a glancing blow, but it seemed to have an effect. The creature recoiled, its grip loosening just enough for him to break free. Maxwell wasted no time, scrambling backward, his hand slipping on the floor as he tried to get away. The creature growled, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in his chest. It was angry now, its eyes flashing with fury as it stalked toward him, slow and deliberate. It didn't need to rush. It knew he couldn't escape. Maxwell's heart raced as he backed into the corner, his body trembling with fear. He could feel the coldness of the tower's walls pressing in on him. There was no way out. No way to fight this thing. The creature moved closer, its grin widening, its eyes glowing with a sickening hunger. Maxwell was paralyzed with fear, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't scream. And then, just as the creature's claws were about to sink into his chest, he heard it. A loud crash. The tower door burst open, and in an instant, a figure rushed into the room. Maxwell barely registered who it was as the figure grabbed the creature, pulling it off of him. The creature snarled, its body twisting and writhing as it tried to fight back, but the new arrival was strong, stronger than anything Maxwell had seen. In a blur of motion, the figure hurled the creature backward, sending it crashing against the far wall. The creature let out an inhuman screech, a sound that tore through Maxwell's ears. For a moment, the room seemed to shake with the force of it. And then, silence. Maxwell lay there, gasping for breath, his mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. The figure turned toward him. It was another ranger, but not one Josh had met before. The stranger's face was grim, his eyes full of pity. "You're lucky," the stranger said, his voice low. "Not everyone survives Tower 411. Maxwell wanted to speak, to ask what the hell was going on, but his voice wouldn't come. His throat was too dry, his heart still pounding in his chest. "Come on," the ranger said, pulling him to his feet. "We need to leave." Maxwell nodded numbly, his legs unsteady beneath him. He followed the ranger out of the tower, his mind barely registering the surroundings. As they walked into the night, the forest around them was quiet, unnervingly still. The events of the past few hours had left Maxwell drained, confused. As they reached the truck, the ranger turned to him. "Don't look back," he warned. "Don't ever come back here." Maxwell climbed into the truck, the sound of the engine starting finally snapping him out of his haze. He didn't know if he was dreaming or if what he'd experienced had been real. But he knew one thing. Tower 411 had broken him, and he wasn't ever going back. Thank you for joining us for this terrifying story. If you enjoyed this spine-chilling tale, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another horrifying story from Basement 13. We're always here, diving into the darkest corners of the unknown, and we want you along for the ride. Have a scary story of your own? Send it our way, and it might just be featured in an upcoming video. Follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. Stay safe, and remember, never trust the shadows.